professor to me and mentor to others. Professor Frendo is a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London and emeritus professor of Near Eastern Archaeology and the Hebrew Bible, as well as senior fellow of the University of Malta. Has degrees in philosophy, theology, Near Eastern studies, biblical exegesis, and holds a PhD in biblical archaeology from the University College, University of London. He's the author of 3 books: Pre-Exilic Israel, the Hebrew Bible, and Archaeology, Integrating Text and Artifact, 2011. Approaching Biblical Archaeology, 2021, and How to Read Ancient Text with a focus on select Phoenician inscriptions from Malta in 2024, so his most recent publication, as well as numerous articles, book chapters, and reviews. He was a visiting scholar at the Sede Boker in the Negev, Israel, besides having been twice elected visiting scholar at Wolfson College, Oxford. So I'm going to leave the floor to Professor Frendo.
Thank you very much. When Patricia Camilleri asked me to deliver a lecture on my recent book, How to Read Ancient Texts, I accepted and I thank her for the invitation, but it's a daunting task because I find myself caught between 2 stools. One of them is there is a lot of technical detail involved, including biblical Hebrew and comparative Semitics. And on the other hand, I think it deserves also to share with the general public, which means that those who are scholars and familiar with the field will be probably disappointed and find it too banal. The others might find it too technical. So I try to find the middle way, as Aristotle teaches us, in medio stat virtus. Virtue stands in the middle between the extremes. And before I really start, a couple of acknowledgements. I shall be showing some slides of some artifacts, and I owe the photo of Count Saverio Marques's drawn to Professor Nicholas Vella, the photo of the amulet holder of the papyrus inscription to Miss Sharon Sultana from Heritage Malta. She is Senior Manager of Archaeology and Natural History in Heritage Malta. The drawings I owe to Dr. Maxime Anastasi, and the permission to publish and show Count Marques's drawing I owe to Mario Gauci, who is archivist at the Metropolitan Chapter in Medina. So now, without any more ado, we start. The particular topic I chose out of the book is the one where I think I have some suggestions to make, and which will be discussed perhaps by others. And that's would be chapter 6 and 7 of the book. And but I adapted this, understanding ancient inscriptions. The case of CIS I, 123, 123b, and the Tal-Virtù Papyrus inscription. What is CIS? CIS is the Latin name for the collection of inscriptions, Corpus Inscriptionum Semiticarum. Started in 1881, ongoing for many years, and 123 is the number of the inscription, and 123b actually does not exist. We only have it in a drawing. This is one of those mysteries of archaeology where things vanish. And the other one, the Tal-Virtù Papyrus inscription, I shall explain. I would like to, before I really start delve into the topic, to lay my cards, my philosophical cards on the table. And I underscore the word understanding, because this will be an exercise in dealing with data which are fragmentary, incomplete, seemingly incoherent, and unbelievably ambiguous and multivalent. What worse could you have? So I lay my cards on the table by, first of all, this is not working. Let's see here. Right, slots.
I would not touch it. Don't touch it.
No?
To point out.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, this is the, right, that's fine.
Yes, yes, but I want to see if it will work on its own.
Let's see, yes. Let me go back, shall I? It doesn't. All right, now it came because
No,
you
because
did.
I clicked it.
You did it, yeah,
I'll stay here and I'll
Okay. It's going to be a bit of a problem. Can we go back one? So this is the book, which is open access, so you can see anything you want there. But I put it here because I shall be mentioning some bibliographic items, and there will be no time to discuss them here. You can find them in the book. You just click on it, and it's open free of charge on the computer. Now, I refer to Bernard Lonergan's theory of cognition, that in fact, if we examine ourselves, we see that the way we go about attaining knowledge is by obviously examining the data very carefully, so we experience the data, we make an understanding, an insight of the data, and unfortunately many people stop there, and they promulgate their results at that level, which is not on, because we have to make a judgment and verify and reflect whether our data had understood correctly or not by going back to these same data. Which means when you come to texts, you've got to reread them. Not only great literature has to be reread, but even small texts like the one which you're seeing. And in the process, we go through a process of self-correcting process of learning. And once we examine, we realize that we made a mistake, that mistake will no longer be made, which means truth can be attained. Now, Thomas of Aquinas, great theologian and philosopher, depends on Aristotle in his philosophy. And he has this great, tremendous statement in English: for knowledge occurs according as that which is known is in the knower. However, that which is known is in the knower according to the manner of the knower. Which means if I close my eyes, or if I don't sufficiently examine the evidence, then paciencia. And look what a great scholar called Saint-Hilaire said. He said, sorry, it's right, leave it, go back. Where is it? Here. People have passed that way myriads of times and seen nothing. And one day the man of genius notices the links between what we do not know and what is every minute before our eyes. What is knowledge but the slow and gradual cure of our blindness? That's by Saint-Hilaire, The Intellectual Life, an old book but very, very pertinent. It is inevitable that in the exhaustive, this is me, as is generally the case, there will be a bit of ourselves. There will be a bit of ourselves when we attain knowledge. An object doesn't exist apart from my understanding it. But this means not that we create, but that we fashion truth, not from nothing, but on the basis of the data that offer the questions that we are allowed to ask and that we strive to answer in a given case. Now, definitions we shall be the inscriptions we shall be discussing today are labeled as Phoenician inscriptions. Now, this blessed name Phoenician is the fault of the Greeks. These people never called themselves Phoenicians. These are Semitic people who inhabited the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean, ranging from a part slightly to the south in the area here in the north in Syria, and going down to slightly above Gaza. These were the seaboard Semitic people, the famous Canaanites mentioned in the Bible. Now, when the Israelites entered Canaan around 1200 BC, the Canaanites, most of them, they congregated on the seaboard of Lebanon here. And it is these Canaanites whom the Greeks met later on in history. And they were seafaring people, as you know. They came all over the Mediterranean. And therefore we can say every Canaanite, every Phoenician is a Canaanite. But not every Canaanite is a Phoenician. Who are the Phoenicians? The Phoenicians are the Phoenicians who congregated on the seaports in the Lebanon and migrated westwards and founded colonies there. They are what William Robertson Smith already in the late 1800s labeled as maritime Canaanites. What a lovely phrase he used. And nowadays there's books being written and they didn't read what he read, and that's it, it's already there. They are maritime Canaanites. Now, CIS I, II, III is this inscription which you can see in the Museum of Archaeology in Valletta. And this is 1, 2, 3 Bs. Why do we call it 1, 2, 3 Bs? Because it is practically identical, except for the names of the persons involved who are making a dedication. Now, what do you notice here? Well, this inscription here doesn't exist. It's just a drawing, and we have to depend on the drawing of whoever made it. So I'm going to leave that out for the moment. This one exists, and we have to come to terms with it. What do you notice here? This is an inscription. The measurements are 23.5 by 8 centimeters. You see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, letters written from right to left. There is no word division. There are no spaces between the words. There are no vowels. There are no full stops. There is nothing. Just a string of letters. And sometimes words start on one line and they end in the other. For example, this letter here and this letter here have to go together. So, what do we have here? This is a close-up of it. It wasn't even written, it's okay, you can leave it. It wasn't even written by the scribe. Probably the scribe wrote it and gave it to a mason to etch the letters into the stone. And you can see, in fact, it's not very straight. It's like my handwriting, and it's a bit clumsy. But there you are. That's what we have. Now, the other one, 1, 2, 3 Bs, is the one which is very similar. I say similar because you will see when we offer the translation that they are practically saying the same things. It's like when in the times of Malta, you read the formula, right? Mrs. So-and-so passed away on, but the formula is always the same. It's the names which change. And here it's a dedication. Okay? Now, the CIS published 1, 2, 3 Bs according to this drawing. And when the editors of CIS in the late 1800s went around asking people in Medina, probably, where the other inscription is, because there is a mystery. We are told in the CIS that 2 inscriptions were found. We are told in other sources that 2 inscriptions were found together. And the CIS editors found only one, the one I showed you. And people said, we don't know. It's not here. So we have that they published a drawing of it. There were actually 2 drawings originally, and this was the one accepted. And until this is the one you're going to find in 99.999% of the publications. But there is another drawing, which seems to be a bit better. It is this one by a certain Count Saverio Marchese in ink, and painting is here. So you see, this, for example, is a bit of a clumsy letter here. This is not. So we will take that one. This is a close-up of it. It's only a drawing. It still could be wrong, but it's not drawing as we do drawing in archaeology nowadays. It's not to scale or anything. It's as the painter, I might say, saw it. Now, what is the overall description of CIS I and 1, 2, 3 Bs? I won't say 1, 2, 3 Bs much about it because we don't have it. So we have 1, 2, 3. It is a material artifact of stone with incised letters. The twin inscription, as I said, already appears in drawing only. The writing of the one which exists is relatively clear. It's not the writing which poses problem in this case. There is no word division. There are no vowels, just like in modern Hebrew and modern Arabic there isn't. But there it's a lived language, it's a living language. This is the dead one. We can't interview them. And there are no interpuncts. Interpuncts are signs like vertical strokes or circular etches in the stone, which indicate that the scribe wanted to help you to visualize a word division. But we know from really very modern research, ultra recent, that in fact language, and these people teach us about it, there is no such thing as word division. There are pauses and accents. And so it's a question of how, and experiments, empirical experiments have been made to show that we have a 2-second spurt of sounds which we utter and then we stop. So these people knew it. It was all oral in general. Now, an example of English is not a Semitic language, obviously. It's not made for this type of juggling. But even if I were to write it in English, this is the equivalent. By the way, the Phoenician is written from right to left, right? Now, if in English I give you this inscription, you will then, because of this pause and accent, and since you know the language, you will probably divide it like this, and you will, if I tell you to vocalize it, you will probably tell me, open the door, please. That's how they read. But in this case, in their case, it was simpler than in English, because the structure of the language is made for it. If I tell you KTB in Maltese, you can imagine Kitab, Ktib, Kitbu, anything you want. Who will decide? The context. And because it's a living language. In this case, there are problems in Phoenician, because it's not a living language and we can't interview them. The texts are very small, so the context becomes very limited, the linguistic context. It is the archaeological context which will help us a lot, as I shall show. But even there, we don't stand on dogmatic ground. This is an example of an interpunct, you see? That stroke, it's not dividing words, it's dividing strings of words because of how you pronounce it and how when you make the pause, right? This is it's a drawing of it, look. That's an interpunct, 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 okay? Those are strokes which show where you have to stop and divide. So it was a help from the scribe. They don't always do it. Do we have interpuncts in Malta? I don't think so, as far as I remember. Not in a single inscription which I've studied. Do we have word division in Malta? Yes. Very late. Very late, the inscription from Gozo, and the Amgau inscription, that has word division. Why? Probably because they were under even Latin influence, but even in Latin there was no word division often, and also because the Gozo thing was a public document. So my idea of it being read with pauses and so on drops. But usually we don't have them. Yes? So this is this transcription of CIS I, 1, 2, 3. You see, for example, this letter here has to be linked to this. They don't care. They know how to do it. Like the open the door, please. All of you must have intuition that it says open the door, please. So I have 6 lines. According to the commonly accepted word division, I use word division tra virgolette, right? The text read thus, Nesiv mikba'al shim nahum, etc., etc., etc. It's a formula, it's a votive inscription. It's a votive inscription, which was made by a chap called Nahum here. And the problem here is the vocalization of this second word. 1, 2, 3 B's. The drawing is not complete because probably he saw an incomplete or a broken or a scratched inscription. So it will be this. You realize the formula is the same. It's the names which change. And there is a reconstruction. But this is just for you to know, not to worry about it. Next one. Yeah, so this is the twin inscriptions. If you put them alongside each other in English transcription, you will have this. And I put these words in red because that's where the problem lies, and it is a diabolical problem. The words on their own are not difficult. Nesib mil Baal. Who was Baal? Baal was the Canaanite god of fertility, the storm god, no problem at all. Nesib means stela, right? And the rest is easy, as I shall show you later on. The problem is with this diabolical word MLK. If you vocalize it milk, it means king. If you vocalize it monk, it means sacrifice. And there are other problems, which we shall see in a minute. Now, sorry, this, I'm going to focus on the first one, the one which exists, CIS 1, 2, 3. Yes? There are 7 possible translations, and I've written in brackets those which are possible, those which are probable, and those which are, unfortunately, in my opinion, I could be wrong. So, first possibility, stele of milk Baal, possible but not highly probable. Stele of an offering instead of an infant, not possible. Stele of a sacrifice consisting of an infant, possible but not highly probable. Stele of a sacrifice of a lord, which means a high-class person, possible but not probable. Stele of a human sacrifice of one making it, not possible, even because human has to be etched out. It is not true what you read in, I'm sorry I'm saying it this way, what you read in most of the literature that North means human sacrifice. It does not, as John Day has conclusively shown also. Stele of a sacrifice to Baal, possible, but not probable. And the last one, stele of one, which means someone, sacrifice to Baal, possible and highly probable. I very quickly go over these, very quickly. Milk Baal would be the, milk would be the adjective of Baal. So King Baal, yes, possible. But for reasons you'll see later on, it's not probable. Stele of an offering instead of an infant. This is not possible because the word Baal was divided, which you can do grammatically, as a preposition, bet and ul, bet instead of an infant. But I'm sorry, bet has never got the meaning of instead of, at the most, at the price of, but not in the sense of substituting object A for object B. So that's not on. And the other one is possible here, wait a minute. Of a lord is possible, but not really probable. This one is not possible for linguistic grounds, because the author who suggested it thought that he could play around with Baal and Baal, but in fact, as linguists will know, they are not free variants, they are allophones, so you cannot change it when the root of the word is different. And then there is a verb, a verbal conjugation in Phoenician which resembles Hebrew, yufal. It's not very frequent, but it's possible. So the difference between these two is they are both speaking of a human sacrifice. The difference is this one is, they are both speaking of a sacrifice. Number 6 is telling us, it's not telling us what sacrifice there is. Whereas number 7 is implying very clearly that you are dealing with a human sacrifice. In this case, an infant sacrifice. Yes? Now, if we go to the inscription, which does not exist anymore, the letter, the third word, which was read Aleph M R, and everybody said it is more, and they all were drooling in their mouths saying that this was the earliest example in the Mediterranean of a human sacrifice, of a sacrifice of a lamb instead of an infant. The problem is that this M, up to 1946, was always read as an S. And Garbini, a great Italian Semitic scholar, reverted to the S rather than the M. And the Count Marques's copy, which I showed you, seems to corroborate this. Now, it is true that in the 7th century there are cases where the S and this particular S called the Samek and the Mem resemble each other. It is true. But when you see all the evidence together, it's preferable to read it as an S. A, because it is possible, and B, because it makes more sense. Because if you haul in the twin inscription, you will see that they are really, really parallel. They are really twins. So Molkomor should be read as Molk Osir. And Osir stands for Osiris. And Osiris was the Egyptian god who was the equivalent, exactly the equivalent of the Canaanite Baal. And did the Phoenicians in Malta often mention Osiris? Of course they did. For example, in the inscription which we have now on exhibition in the museum, they have names with Osiris, Osir, Shamar, Shamar, Osir, and so on. So they were very Egyptianized because we have Phoenician colonies in Egypt also. Yes? So, if you read it this way, you see Nesif Molk Baal, sacrifice, stele of one sacrifice to Baal, and the other one would be stele of one sacrifice to Osir. A perfect parallelism, a perfect twin inscription. Stele of a sacrifice to Baal, in the case of 1, 2, 3 B's to Osiris, and the number 7 was stele of one sacrifice to Baal. I prefer this one. I will show you why in a minute. And to Osiris in the other one. Now, contrary to what a number of publications claim, we now know that the word molk, in the sense of sacrifice, on its own, without further specification, cannot mean human sacrifice. It simply means sacrifice. That's it. Neither more nor less. If you want to say it's of a man, you say sacrifice Adam. If you want to say of a child, you specify. Of a lamb, not in our case, but in other inscriptions, molkomor. This means that sacrifice to Baal does not specify which sacrifice is being referred to, whereas of one sacrifice to Baal clearly refers to a human sacrifice. Now, the whole inscription would read like this: stele of the one sacrifice to Baal, which Mr. Nahum set up for Baal Hamon, Lord, because he heard the voice of his prayers, literally his words. Twin inscription, really twin. The parallel is spot on. Stele of the one sacrifice to Osiris, which Mr. Arish reconstructed, we don't know, set up for Baal Hamon, Lord, because he heard the voice of his prayers. Now, the archaeological context will help us. Mrs. Shortland Jones had a few years back brought to our attention a citation in the Malta Government Gazette of 1819. And the Government Gazette of 1819 tells us, in another excavation near the city notable of Medina, there have been found 60 earthen vessels filled with bones of very small size, therefore supposed to be shown of still children or animals. You can read it because I don't have much time. All the above here, and then there is another, Mr. Charlton, who spoke of, always in Medina, the bones of animals and birds. All this together suggests what we call a tophet. What is a tophet in Phoenician archaeology? A tophet is a sacrificial cemetery, like the one we have in Carthage, and where they buried the children who were offered in sacrifice. Now, Professor Vella has shown that most probably, we don't know where this was, but that was probably where the Dominican convent now is, in that area. Now, he has shown that such a tophet would have been in an area at Tal-Virtù, not far from the Dominican convent. Next one. So why did I call in the archaeological context? Because from the point of view of philology, I can't dogmatically say that my suggestion 7 is the right one. It is probably the right one, but I can't be mathematically sure. But once you hold in the archaeological context, both implied in the inscription itself and in the whereabouts of where it was found, and in Mrs. Shortland Jones pointing out what the Government Gazette said, we have to think of a tophet. And therefore, that translation receives corroboration from the context. Now, always in the rabbit area, Tal-Virtù in the 70s, in the private garden of the late Dr. Daniel McAuliffe, there was a tomb found, and in it various things, but I concentrate on what interests us. This emerald bronze holder, which opens up, the head is in the form of the Egyptian god Horus. It opens up, and there was a papyrus in it. Is it low?
Yeah.
We're in a mess. So I better show all the slides, and then I explain. We can't use it? Yeah, this is the inscription. I will discuss it later on. This is the inscription in ink from right to left with Isis here, the Egyptian goddess Isis. Next one. This is a drawing of this inscription. Okay? In ink. Next. This is, as Rocco in 1975 had suggested the translation, and this is Schmidt's in 2017. Completely different. Next one. I will explain this verbally. Hell, yes, next one. The translation says like this: laugh at, crush, O strong of heart or adversary, deride, overpower, yea, encircle the enemy, make light of him, trample him over the sweet waters, yea, bind him on the sea, enclose him, mock him. This, I will explain what it is, but very quickly I will point out, it's got what in West Semitic philology, poetry, Hebrew, Phoenician, Ugaritic, is a poetic form, and there is a lot of parallelism. It's not a poem, but it's got poetic form in it. The first time in Malta that we have verging on poetry. Look at the parallelism. Laugh at, crush, parallel to deride and overpower. Crush, parallel to encircle. Make light of, parallel to deride. Trample, it's overpower. Sweet waters, parallel the sea. Bind him, parallels encircle, and close parallels encircle, and mock him goes back to number one, crush. It's perfect. It's perfect. Unbelievable. It's perfect Semitic parallelism, poetic structure. Next one. This is an intertextual relationship with an Egyptian collection of ritual spells called the Book of Apophis. And I will explain verbally when the battery dies on me. Here you can see the word laugh or its synonyms does not appear in the Book of Apophis, but the idea is present. Crush, overpower, trample regarding Apophis is found in the Book of Apophis. Encircle and close, this verb is not used, but the idea is very clearly there. And bind, idea is present in the Book of Apophis, where in 26:18 it says, Isis shall fetter you, O Apophis. Next one. Now, 1975, right through 2017, I will discuss that verbally, because I'm afraid of a death going on here. Now, this has never been published. It was given to me by the museum, and it's fantastic. This is, in the old days, when photography, the glass negative. And this glass negative of the inscription confirms that reading by all those people you saw in green, except Professor Schmidt's, is correct. And I too, after painful examination, endorse that, not because it is the majority, because majority doesn't always constitute truth, otherwise Einstein would have failed, but because it is so, and this corroborates it. Next. This is a chart of scripts, Malta and Elephantine. We think that because of the close similarity of the scripts, the Phoenician colony in Malta, with the one who wrote the one in Tal-Virtù, would have come from or borrowed the ideas from the Phoenician colony in Elephantine in Egypt, the very south of Egypt, where there was a Jewish community, an Aramaean community, a Phoenician community, and so on. Now, this is the 5 lines, as they are on the papyrus, can be resolved into 4 lines of poetry. And these people could read poetry even had the thing been simply a string of letters. We have evidence from ancient Greece about this. We have evidence from the Hebrew Bible. We have evidence from the Phoenicians. Okay? So it is up to us. Are we being subjective? No. We are opening our eyes. We're not being subjective. We are examining the data very closely. And it is we who have to read these 5 lines as 4 lines of poetry. This happens all the time, even in Hebrew poetry, ancient, not modern, ancient Hebrew poetry. Next one. Yes, the poetic structure of the papyrus, which I've discussed. It's really very tight. Next one. So what have we seen? We've seen this one, which exists in the museum. We've seen the drawing you usually find, but this one which seems to be better, Count Marquez Saverio. We've seen the Tal-Virtù Papyrus. Yes? And now, reading generally meant, I will discuss those later on because it's verbal. So I want to explain now on the papyrus. I rushed through this slide, carrellata, because I'm afraid that the battery is going to go off. So, the papyrus. The papyrus was found inside the amulet bronze holder. You open it and you find the tattered papyrus. It's fragmentary. But, first of all, the measurements are 7, very small, 7 centimeters by 4.8 centimeters. And then there are some fragments used just to measure their dimension. Now, some scholars have posited that here there would have been more writing. The doyen of Phoenician epigraphy, and really I agree with him, says no, the inscription makes sense as it is. It's true. There's no need to say some letters are missing from here. So what are these ink blotches? You know, it's very difficult to write Phoenician characters in ink. Can you imagine? On a small papyrus, 7 centimeters. Very, very difficult. And you're bound to botch it. That's why this letter here has been seen by some people as a B, and by Professor Schmitz as something completely different, as a T. I think those are the reasons. But when you look at high resolution photographs closely, and you keep doing the self-correcting process of learning, etc., and seeing the evidence again, you come up with what I've shown you. Now, what was I saying? Yes, this is very interesting. This was found in the 70s, published by Rocco and Guder. Guder did the artistic bit on the amulet bronze holder, and Rocco did the text. Many years later, so 75, I think it was published, many years later, 1989, an Austrian scholar who was an expert Egyptologist came to Malta to study the artifacts in the museum in Malta and Gozo, which were either Egyptian artifacts or Egyptianizing, which means they followed. And he said very clearly, he said, he knows Egyptian, but he said very clearly, I don't know Phoenician. I'm not an expert in West Semitic. I have no idea what this was saying. But he made a very important but. But, he said, if your translation is correct, then this matches whole phrases from the Egyptian book of Apophis. Who was Apophis? Apophis was an underworld, a sea monster, who was supposed to pop his head up and eat and attack the sun in his daily journey, and it goes under the world on the waters, and he was supposed to, these magical spells were supposed to be uttered so that the sun god would be preserved. By the time of the New Kingdom, which is when the Book of Apophis was collected together, this was applied to any Tom, Dick, and Harry who was buried. And who is saying, now people usually say it is somebody, Isis is telling the strong of heart, which you saw there, so as to destroy Apophis. No, I think in fact it is the dead person and his relatives who are praying to Isis and her entourage to destroy the monster Apophis. Since we have the head of Horus on the amulet, it could also be that there is a reference also to the myth of Horus, and the reference with the enemy would then be Set. So we have an option, but most probably on balance, the enemy will be Mr. Apophis, this monster. So what is this? It sounds like a violent text, but it's a prayer for the dead person buried in Tal-Virtù, so that the Isis and her entourage will protect him. If we did not have this inscription in Phoenician, we would have thought that the buried person would be Egyptian because of the bronze holder and the papyrus, but the dead person, no, was a Phoenician person, 6th century BC. Now, if we could go to the last slide. Sorry, one back. Here, I showed you the structure. Yes, go further on. So, one more. Laugh at or crush, shahak, in Hebrew, etc. O strong of your heart, your adversary. Deride, overpower, yea, encircle the enemy. Make light of him, trample him over the sea waters. Yea, bind him on the sea, and close him on the sea. Is the water in the underworld in which the boat of the sun god and eventually the dead person went. Now, yeah. More? Yeah, this. 75 till 104.
No.
Finished, okay. 75 till 104. Everybody, including some very big shots, accepted Rocco's transcription of the text. Schmidt's did not. In the book I discuss why I don't agree, why I agree is going to be positive, why I agree more with Rocco and company. Admittedly, you can't be dogmatic about it, but when you see a text like that coming to light, it's not imagination. We did not create the text. We fashioned on the basis of the data. Now, some general conclusions. First of all, we have, research has shown that language in its original state is not concerned with word division, it's concerned with pauses and accents. So it's a question of prosody, not a question of words. Secondly, experiments have been done, empirical experiments, to show that a 2-second spurt of sound can be retained by memory by whoever is hearing, and then the reader can go. 3, when this happens in long texts, like Hebrew poetry, you have to, the reader, and even in Latin and Greek texts, not only in Phoenician and Hebrew, the reader has to have his eye on the words which are coming, but he has to pronounce the words he's just seen. A 2-second spurt of sounds. Thirdly, we saw the CIS I, II, III inscription, probably supported by CIS I, II, III, where in Malta, in the 7th century, we have that inscription, which you saw the translation, which turns out to be a foundation sacrifice of the earliest Phoenician settlers in Malta. How do we know they are the earliest Phoenician settlers in Malta? Because there is no such thing like in the later inscriptions when they had been established here, when they say, for example, Mr. Tony Bonanno, Professor Bonanno, son of, son, grandson of, no, nothing. These Mr. Nahum and Mr. Arish were the first settlers here with their families. Third, we know that they practiced child sacrifice on the basis of the archaeological evidence reported in the Malta Government Gazette of the 1800s and on the basis of the inscription itself. if you accept my suggestion number 7. Then we saw also the Tal-Virtù Papyrus, which is a very intriguing piece of information. 5 lines which can be resolved by the reader into 4 poetic lines. And they make sense exactly as they are. No need to postulate a fragment which is missing on the right. Isis features, her symbol on her head features, Horus features. It's extremely Egyptianizing. And somebody must have come here who had links with the Phoenician colony in Elephantine. How do we know this? Because of the type of letters used in writing, and Egyptianizing, obviously, because of what I told you about the Book of Apophis. Now, if you want a very simple example of what I mean by an experiment of 2-second spurt of sounds, pause, continue, I will give you one in a minute. The Sibyl at Cume in the Greek colony near Naples, and then taken over by the Latins, by the Romans, used to foretell the fate of the Roman soldier, whether he's going to return from the battle or not. But before I do that, I must say, remember, punctuation came into being only in the 6th century AD. At first, we have even in Latin and Greek, generally 99%, we have what we have in Phoenician, a string of letters. So I'm going to voice now 2 statements. The difference is, unfortunately, I didn't show it on the, if you make a comma, but you will know from my pause. The words written are, I will not pronounce it, IBIS, REDIBS, NON, MORIERIS, INBELLO. Now, there was no punctuation. There were just these accents and these pauses of sound. And I'm going to say it in 2 different ways. There's no punctuation. Where nowadays, to register my pause, you would need a comma. Ibis, redibis non, morieris in bello. You will go, you will not return, you will die in battle. Now, a different pause and a different accent. There is no punctuation. But if you were to put the punctuation, it would be ibis, redibis, non morieris in bello. You will go, you will return, you will not die in battle. That's exactly what this whole lecture was really about. Pause, not word division, accents, not word division. And the other thing is, like a case study of how we go about understanding these flimsy data which we have. We don't start with an empty mind. We start with some ideas, no matter how wrong or obscure they might be. We examine the data, we understand the data, we get an insight, and then comes the crucial point, what Lonergan calls the reflection or the judgment. I ask the question, is it really so? The scientists do this when they re-examine and they do the experiment and they check again and again. Even in this case, that's how we have to do it. There's no other way.